The royal ship Silver Crown moved slowly through the dark space near the red moon of Varos. It was one of the safest ships in the Empire. Hundreds of soldiers guarded it, and the best pilots controlled it. At the center of the ship sat Queen Lyara, ruler of the Zalarian Empire. She believed her guards would protect her from any danger. Without warning, loud alarms filled the ship. Red lights flashed across every wall and ceiling. A powerful explosion shook the entire vessel and threw several officers to the floor. Enemy ships had appeared from nowhere and started attacking. The Queen quickly stood from her seat and looked at the large battle screen in shock. Reports came from every direction. The front shields were gone. 2 defense towers had already been destroyed. Enemy soldiers were preparing to enter the ship. The officers in the command room looked afraid. Some could not even speak clearly as they gave their reports to the Queen. Queen Lyara ordered her royal guards to prepare for battle. These soldiers were famous across the Empire. They wore shining armor and carried the newest weapons. They had promised to protect their queen with their lives. For many years, the Queen believed those promises. Another explosion hit the ship harder than before. Smoke filled the hallways and emergency doors closed all around the vessel. Fear quickly spread through the command room. One guard looked toward the escape pods. Another slowly stepped back toward the exit door. Then the first guard left. Soon another followed him. Within moments, the Queen watched in disbelief as her own royal guards rushed toward the escape area. Their faces showed fear instead of loyalty. Nobody looked back at their queen. Nobody stopped to protect her. "The ship is lost!" one officer shouted while running away. "We cannot win this battle," another yelled. Queen Lyara stood silently as the room around her became empty. Only minutes earlier, she had been surrounded by soldiers and advisors. Now she stood almost alone inside the damaged command center. The sound of alarms became louder with every passing second. Near the doorway stood one final figure. He was taller than most Solarians and wore dark military armor with the symbol of Earth on his shoulder. His name was Captain Daniel Hayes, a human soldier sent as part of Earth's military exchange program. He was not one of the Queen's guards. Protecting her was never his duty. The Queen looked at him and pointed toward the escape route. "You should leave," she said quietly. "Your people need you alive." Daniel looked toward the empty hallway where the guards had disappeared. Then he looked back at the Queen. His face remained calm even as the ship continued shaking around them. "With respect, Your Majesty," he answered. "Human soldiers do not leave civilians behind." The Queen stared at him with surprise. "I am not your queen," she said. Daniel gave a small nod. "That may be true," he replied, "but you are under my protection now." For several seconds the Queen could not speak. No Zalarian soldier had stayed beside her, yet the human, a stranger from another world, refused to leave. She had heard many stories about humans before. Most described them as aggressive fighters and dangerous warriors. None of the stories had mentioned loyalty like this. Suddenly, a loud metal sound echoed through the corridor outside the command room. Something heavy struck the main blast door. The impact shook the walls around them. Then came another hit, even stronger than the first. Daniel moved toward the doorway and raised his rifle. "The enemy boarding team has reached this level," he said. The Queen looked toward the damaged door as fear slowly filled her eyes. "There should be guards here," she whispered. Daniel checked the weapon in his hands. "There should have been," he answered. Another strike landed against the door. Cracks spread across the metal surface. Warning lights flashed above the entrance as the locking system started to fail. Whatever waited outside was getting closer with every second. Daniel stepped forward and placed himself between the Queen and the door. "Stay behind me, Your Majesty." The Queen looked at the human soldier standing alone in front of the entrance. Beyond that door waited enemies, monsters, and almost certain death. Yet the human did not move back, even a single step. The blast door exploded inward. Smoke filled the room, and from the darkness outside, something huge slowly walked inside. The broken blast door crashed onto the floor with a loud sound. Thick smoke quickly filled the command room and blocked the Queen's view. Heavy footsteps slowly came from the darkness outside. Queen Lyara stepped back in fear as a huge creature entered the room. It was nearly 3 meters tall and covered in black armor-like skin. its glowing red eyes fixed directly on the Queen. Daniel raised his rifle but did not fire immediately. He carefully watched the creature and studied its movements. The monster carried long blades attached to both arms and moved with surprising speed. It was one of the Carthan hunters, the deadliest soldiers in the outer systems. Entire military units had fallen against only a few of them during past wars. The hunter let out a terrifying scream and rushed forward. Daniel moved to the side and opened fire at once. Bright flashes filled the room as bullets struck the creature's armor. The hunter stumbled but did not fall. Instead, it became even more aggressive and charged directly toward the human soldier. Queen Lyara watched in complete shock. Solarian soldiers normally fought from long distances using energy weapons and shields, but the human soldier stood his ground only a few meters away from the creature. Daniel moved quickly between broken consoles and damaged walls while continuing to fire. Every movement looked planned and controlled. The hunter swung its blade toward Daniel's head. He ducked under the attack and rolled across the floor. Before the creature could strike again, Daniel fired several rounds into its leg joints. The monster lost its balance for only a second. That single moment was enough for the human soldier. Daniel pulled a small explosive device from his belt and threw it forward. The grenade landed directly under the creature's feet. A powerful explosion shook the room and threw pieces of metal into the air. When the smoke finally cleared, the hunter lay motionless on the floor. The battle was over almost as quickly as it had started. Queen Lyara stared silently at the fallen enemy. It had taken entire Zolarian squads to defeat creatures like that before. Yet this human soldier had defeated one alone inside a damaged room. Daniel calmly checked his weapon and replaced the empty magazine. His breathing remained steady as if this was nothing unusual for him. "You fought it alone," the Queen finally said. Daniel looked toward the destroyed doorway and nodded slightly. "Humans train for situations like this," he answered. "Fear is normal, but running is a choice." The Queen looked down at the floor and remembered her own guards escaping only minutes earlier. His words stayed in her mind. Suddenly, Daniel's communication device made a sharp sound. He activated it and listened carefully to the message coming through the static. His expression changed immediately. Someone had disabled the ship's emergency beacon from inside the vessel. That meant the attackers had help from someone already aboard. The Queen looked at him with disbelief. "You mean someone on this ship helped them?" she asked quietly. Daniel nodded. "This attack was planned very carefully," he replied. "The enemy knew your location, your defenses, and your escape routes." The Queen slowly realized what his words truly meant. Someone close to her had betrayed the Empire. Before either of them could speak again, the light suddenly went out. The room became completely dark, except for the red emergency lights along the walls. Then a cold voice echoed through the ship's communication system. The message was meant only for Queen Lyara. "Your Majesty," the voice said calmly, "there is no escape this time." The Queen immediately recognized the speaker. Her eyes widened in shock and disbelief. The voice belonged to someone she had trusted for many years. Someone who had stood beside her during meetings, ceremonies, and wars. Someone who should never have been her enemy. Daniel slowly raised his rifle once more. "Looks like this night just became more complicated," he said. Somewhere in the darkness of the ship, the traitor was waiting for them. The cold voice disappeared from the speakers, but the silence that followed felt even heavier. Queen Lyara stood frozen as memories rushed through her mind. She knew that voice very well. It belonged to High Commander Verax, the man who had served her family for almost 20 years. He had fought beside her father and had helped her become queen. Daniel noticed the change in her face immediately. "You know him," he said quietly. The Queen slowly nodded while looking toward the dark hallway ahead. She could hardly believe it herself. Of all people in the Empire, Verax was the last person she would ever suspect of betrayal. Yet his voice left no room for doubt. "We need to move," Daniel said while checking the map on his wrist device. "Staying here will only make us easy targets." The Queen agreed and followed him into the damaged corridor. Smoke drifted through the hallways while broken wires hung from the ceiling. The once beautiful royal ship now looked like a battlefield. As they walked deeper into the ship, they passed abandoned weapons and empty armor suits left behind by fleeing soldiers. Queen Lyara lowered her eyes as she saw the signs of panic everywhere. These had been her finest guards and most trusted officers. Yet when fear arrived, loyalty had disappeared with it. Daniel suddenly raised his hand and stopped walking. He noticed fresh footprints near one of the maintenance doors. The prints were too large for Zalarian soldiers and too heavy for civilians. Someone had moved through this area only minutes earlier. Daniel carefully opened the door and entered the room with his weapon ready. Inside the room stood several communication terminals. Most of them had been destroyed, but one screen was still active. Daniel quickly moved closer and started reading the information. His expression became serious almost immediately. The attackers had received detailed maps of the ship's defenses and security systems. The information came from inside the royal network, Daniel said. Queen Lyara felt her heart sink. Only a few people had access to those files. High Commander Varex was one of them. For the first time, she allowed herself to accept the painful truth. The attack on her ship was not only an invasion, it was a carefully planned betrayal. Suddenly, one of the screens came to life. The image of Commander Varex appeared before them. His gray uniform looked perfect, and his expression remained calm. It was almost as if he were attending a normal meeting instead of leading an attack against his queen. Queen Lyara stepped closer to the screen in disbelief. "Why?" she asked softly. Varex looked at her without emotion. "Because the Empire has become weak," he answered. "You speak of peace while our enemies grow stronger every year. The galaxy respects power, not kindness." His voice remained cold as he explained his reasons. Queen Lyara shook her head slowly. "You destroyed your own people for power?" Varex showed no regret on his face. "Sacrifices are necessary for a stronger future," he replied. Then his eyes moved toward Daniel, standing beside her. "But I did not expect the human to become a problem." Daniel remained completely calm. "Funny," he answered. "I was thinking the same thing about you." For the first time, anger appeared on Varex's face. He ordered Daniel to surrender the queen immediately. In return, he promised the human safe passage back to Earth. The offer filled the room with silence as Queen Lyara waited for Daniel's answer. The human soldier did not even need a second to think. "I don't trade lives for safety," Daniel said firmly. Varex narrowed his eyes before ending the transmission. Seconds later, warning alarms began echoing through the ship once again. New enemy signals appeared on Daniel's scanner. Multiple boarding teams were moving directly toward their position from every direction. Daniel loaded a fresh magazine into his rifle and looked toward the Queen. "It seems your commander didn't like my answer," he said. The Queen looked at the approaching enemy signals on the scanner. This time there would not be one enemy waiting for them. There would be dozens. The enemy soldiers moved through the ship like a dark wave. Daniel watched the signals on his scanner grow closer every second. There were too many enemies and not enough space to escape. He quickly searched the area and chose a narrow hallway as their defensive position. If they fought there, the attackers could only come a few at a time. Queen Lyara watched as Daniel moved tables, metal crates, and broken equipment into the corridor. Within minutes, he had built a small barricade. His movements were fast and careful, as if he had done this many times before. The Queen could hardly understand how calm he remained. Around them, the ship felt like it was falling apart. "You have fought battles like this before?" she asked. Daniel loaded another magazine into his rifle and nodded. "Humans have a long history of fighting when the odds are bad," he answered. "Sometimes the only thing left is to stand your ground." His voice carried no fear, only determination. The first attackers appeared at the end of the hallway moments later. Energy blasts lit up the corridor as the battle began. Daniel fired with careful aim and dropped the leading enemies one after another. The narrow passage worked exactly as he planned. The attackers could not use their numbers against him. The Queen stayed behind cover and watched the fight unfold. The human soldier never wasted movement or ammunition. Every shot had a purpose. Every decision happened quickly and with confidence. For the first time in her life, Queen Lyara understood why so many civilizations respected human soldiers. The battle continued for several long minutes. More enemies arrived, replacing those who had fallen before them. Smoke filled the hallway, and sparks flew from damaged walls. Even Daniel's armor showed signs of damage from enemy fire, yet he refused to step backward. Suddenly, an energy blast struck Daniel in the shoulder. He fell to one knee as pain crossed his face. The Queen moved toward him in alarm, but Daniel quickly stood again. He ignored the injury and raised his weapon once more. The attackers were still coming. "You are hurt," the Queen said. Daniel glanced at the wound and gave a small smile. "Still standing," he replied. "That means the fight isn't over yet." His answer surprised the Queen more than the injury itself. Many soldiers would have retreated already, but the human remained where he was. The enemy attacks became stronger as more boarding teams reached the hallway. Daniel knew they could not hold the position forever. He checked the ship's communication system one final time. To his surprise, a weak signal finally appeared on the scanner. Someone had answered the emergency beacon. "Rescue forces are coming," Daniel said. The Queen felt hope return for the first time since the attack began. But Daniel looked at the arrival time and remained serious. The nearest ships would not arrive for another 20 minutes. In battle, 20 minutes could feel like 20 hours. The sounds of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor once again. This time, the enemies moved aside as a familiar figure stepped forward. High Commander Varix himself had arrived with armed soldiers behind him. He looked directly at the Queen and the human standing beside her. "It is over," Varix said calmly. Daniel slowly stepped in front of Queen Lyara and raised his rifle one more time. "No," the human soldier answered. "It starts now." The hallway became silent as Daniel and Commander Varix faced each other. Behind Varix stood heavily armed soldiers ready to attack at his command. Behind Daniel stood only Queen Lyara and the damaged wall of the ship. The difference in numbers was impossible to ignore. Yet the human soldier never lowered his weapon. Varix took a step forward and looked directly at Daniel. "This is your final chance," he said calmly. "Step aside and return to Earth alive." The commander still could not understand why a human would risk everything for an alien ruler. To him, survival was always more important than loyalty. Daniel shook his head slowly. "A soldier protects people," he answered. "It does not matter where they were born or what world they come from." His words echoed through the damaged corridor. Queen Lyara looked at him with surprise and respect. She had never heard anyone speak with such certainty. Without another warning, Varix ordered his soldiers to attack. Energy fire filled the hallway as Daniel returned fire from behind the barricade. The corridor shook with explosions and flying metal. One by one, enemy soldiers fell back under the humans' defense. But the attackers kept coming. Minutes passed as the battle grew harder. Daniel's armor was damaged in several places and his movements became slower. He was tired and injured, but he continued fighting. Every second he held the line gave the rescue ships more time to arrive. For him, that was all that mattered. Then another blast struck near his position and threw him against the wall. His rifle slid across the floor as pain spread through his side. Queen Lyara rushed toward him as he struggled to stand again. The enemy soldiers slowly moved closer through the smoke-filled corridor. "You have done enough," the Queen said. Daniel picked up his rifle and looked toward the approaching enemies. "Not yet," he replied quietly. "As long as I can stand, I can fight." The Queen could see the exhaustion on his face, but she also saw something stronger than fear. She saw determination. Suddenly a new sound echoed through the ship. Heavy engines roared outside as bright lights appeared through the damaged windows. Moments later, communication officers reported new ships entering the battle area. Earth's military fleet had finally arrived. The attackers immediately lost their advantage. Enemy ships began retreating while boarding teams pulled back toward their transports. Seeing the battle lost, Commander Varix tried to escape through the lower decks, but loyal officers captured him before he could leave the ship. As the fighting finally ended, medical teams entered the corridor and rushed toward Daniel. The human soldier had survived, but only barely. Queen Lyara stood beside him as the doctors worked. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Days later, news of the battle spread across the empire. Everyone learned the same unbelievable story. The Queen's own guards had abandoned her when danger arrived, but one human soldier from another world had chosen to stay. Months later, Queen Lyara created a new tradition for the royal guard. From that day forward, one position would always belong to a human soldier. It was not because humans were stronger or faster than others. It was because when everyone else ran, the humans stayed.